Hello, I'm the Culture Genie. With the current crisis following the invasion of Ukraine by Russia, I thought it would be prudent to make this video about the fact that we are living in history and always have been. This video will have the anti-Francis Fukuyama view of history, if you will, against the Francis Fukuyama view that history ended with the fall of the Soviet Union, as I think that history will never end. A lot of people like to talk about how it must have been to live in historical moments of history, but a lot of people forget that a lot of those events that we in hindsight view as significant were either seen as not important or did actually not affect a lot of people. At least not directly at first. For example, at the start just before World War I, when the Austrian Crown Prince Franz Ferdinand died by the shots fired from the Serbian nationalist insurgent Gavrilo Princip's gun, it was believed by many that life would just go on as normal, or that the following war would be quickly over and it would be glorious. Little did people think about trench warfare or what was to come. In fact, the early view was that the war would be over quickly, and it would be a very offensive war, rather than a defensive war of attrition. Thus, they thought it would be over in months, not years. On the subject of World War I actually think that the current situation in Ukraine has more in common with the conflicts before it than World War II, but that would be a video in itself. You do not have to view only modern events, insofar as World War I is a modern event, as many of the great so-called empires and the changes of borders in history actually did not change much. Peasants beneath various overlords might have shifted their so-called allegiance, but they usually still remained upon the same patch of land, doing the same type of work. In fact, historically, it has actually been pretty common that various kingdoms and empires have allowed local customs and laws to remain after they took over an area. Even religious conversions of territories usually result in hybrid forms of religious practices. Look at the Anglican Church in England. The remnants of Catholic practices that still exist in Sweden during their phase of great power, despite the country being the leader of the Protestants in the 30 Years' War, or even how the entire Catholic Church incorporated previous religious practices of the Romans into their religion. This sort of blending of previous practices with the new are not something unique to Europe. Here you can see how the Ethiopic Orthodox Church was influenced by the previous Jewish and local traditions that existed in the Ethiopic area in the old Empire of Aksum. In the Islamic world, we have how the Shia 12-hour Islam has been influenced by the Maturidi Sunni theology after the Safavids took over large Sunni-dominated parts in both Iran and Iraq. We also have how the Ottomans had to adopt their religious politics to the local traditions in Syria and Egypt after failing at imposing their doctrines during the 15th to 16th century. The influence of these events or politics actually looked a lot less drastic to the people on the ground than we would believe. Now you're probably wondering what does this have to do with Russia and Ukraine and the current conflict? Well, right now a couple of 100,000 troops from the Russian side are involved in this conflict. Russia has a population of over 140 million people, meaning that not all Russians are in combat, the majority are actually just civilians, and it's a great difference between those that are in combat and the civilians in just sheer numbers. And the lives of them is mostly probably business as usual, depending upon how much the sanctions will affect them now. These events could affect them greatly, or it could barely be noticed. Time and history will tell. And most of us, outside of this conflict between Ukraine and Russia, will just be looking on, doing nothing related to it, or not paying it any mind if it does not become a greater conflict. At most, we will write angry Twitter messages or leave some comments about it, but not much more. I'm speaking about normal people here, not the world leaders. and politicians which are concerned with this. It is important to remember that to most people throughout history has just been life as usual. Of course, the opposite was also sometimes true with big events affecting people largely. In the past, we had all people killed in the world wars, or the Taiping rebellion in China during the 19th century. Even further in the past, we have the Mongol and Turkic invasions and the death those caused. These wars and invasions included the death of several millions. Though I don't think that the Ukraine situation will get that bad, it is a possibility, and we will be affected if this conflict grows out of hand and it gets to the worst case scenario. And we still have to remember that even smaller events have caused great harm to those people that experience it directly. People getting crushed when various armies clash and leaders making decisions that change the future for several generations. Today, we have Ukrainians getting their homes destroyed, and families of the Russian and Ukrainian soldiers who have perished or fear that their loved ones will perish. It is important to remember that conflicts of power and resources have been a near constant in human history. It is only the creation of the atomic bomb that has made the political situation such that full-out war has become rare. At least between great powers, like Russia and the United States. But even if we try to ignore what happens, regardless of it affecting us directly or not, history will continue as humankind will not be passive, and conflicts of interest will remain. Powers have always tried to impose their will upon those around them, sometimes managing, sometimes failing in their quest to control. And people will remember it as history, forgetting that history was made by and involved normal people. Humans of flesh and blood like us. From the lowest serf or slave to the highest king or emperor. They were people, humans, that lived their lives as the world around them kept turning and changing. The Russians and Ukrainians today, together with those of us outside, are basically like the rest of humans throughout history. They just want to live their lives and continue going. In a world that is changing. Or unchanging, depending on perspective. It doesn't matter if you're Putin or just a common man on the ground. Knowing or unknowing, all the people who we read about in dusty tomes were once living humans in this saga of human life we call history. These recent events are a reminder to those of us living today to not forget that people have always lived through what we call history, and that we cannot escape the hold of history. Hopefully humanity will continue to be part of history, and the worst will not happen. The end of mankind. Despite ending upon that rather somber note, I hope you liked this video. Please leave a comment in the comment section, press the like button, and if you have any questions, just post them in. Please do subscribe, as it would help the channel spread awareness about the humanities. اشترك بالقناة من فضلكم.